we're going to check under your seat. You see a Koch brother there? Raise your hand if you see a Koch brother. This is my chance to plug my radio show, so for those of you who don't know me, I do a nationally syndicated radio program. It's called Free Talk Live. It's on 95 radio stations across the country. So the message of liberty is getting out. It's from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m., Monday through Saturday. And the real true message of liberty is getting out to people. It's spreading. We're adding stations all the time. The next guest is the guy who made it all happen. It's Michael Boldin. He's the founder and director of the 10th Amendment Center. It's in Los Angeles. Came a long way. Everybody make him feel welcome.
I bring one message from Los Angeles. We don't need no stinking permission. We don't need no stinking permission to exercise our rights. We need to exercise our rights whether those politicians want to give us a little permission slip to or not. Woo! Yeah, we can clap that. They say I am a tenther. Somehow that's a slur. Chris Matthews says that tenther means you hate America. Back when we founded the 10th Amendment Center back in 2006, they said if you were a tenther, you were with the terrorists. Now they say we're racists. I guess it's just a different ist if you oppose the federal government and all its endless unconstitutional actions, both here and abroad.
Better than an
I have one simple belief. I believe that the federal government is authorized to exercise only those powers that we, the people of the several states, gave to it in the Constitution. And nothing more. But there's a big question. It's a question that probably pervades all through history. When you have a government and you give it some kind of rules, in our case that would be the Constitution, and it violates those rules, which it's always going to do, what do you do about it?
Prosecute him.
Well, there's some options.
Just say no.
You know, some people will say, let's march on D.C. and demand that the federal politicians limit federal power. Oh, a smart crowd in New Hampshire. Nice, I'm in the promised land, I said. Or maybe we can go to federal courts and ask some black robe, politically connected, unaccountable lawyer that works for the federal government to say, oh, federal government, you have too much power, I'm going to limit you. Or maybe we can vote the bums out. Because the new bums are going to say, we don't want all that power you gave to us. You have it back. Pardon my Italian, but that's bullshit. None of it works. The bottom line is going to the government to fix problems created by the government is not just an unbelievably absurd idea. It just doesn't work. Thank you. So the question remains, what do we do about it? Well, Thomas Jefferson gave us a pretty decent answer. No, I'm not talking about let's pull out the guns and start a revolution or a new declaration. I'm saying, I'm sorry. Thomas Jefferson gave us some pretty good ideas. And in 1798, which is a pretty interesting year, Jefferson wrote something known as the Kentucky Resolutions in response to what was known as the Alien and Sedition Acts, which were basically criminalizing free speech. They were pretty nasty back then, too. And in these, mind you, Jefferson was a sitting vice president, so if you can imagine someone like Dick Cheney, or who's the guy, what's the guy, vice president? I can't think. Oh, yeah, that there's a criminal for you. So imagine, and I'll read a couple of quotes here. Imagine, one of those guys, or that Dole guy. Not Dole, Gore. I don't really pay attention to federal politicians. They're all crooks. The several states composing the United States of America are not united on a principle of unlimited submission to their general government. Jefferson also added this juicy one: whensoever the general government assumes undelegated powers, its acts are unauthoritative, void, and of no force. This one I like. This is the meaning of our event today. Where powers are assumed which have not been delegated, a nullification of the act is the rightful remedy. James Madison, another kind of popular guy at the time, he also wrote in Virginia that same year, he said that the states are duty-bound, not just a good idea after you vote some bums out or go to some courts, duty-bound to interpose, to arrest the progress of evil. Basically, it was the state's duty to step up and block unconstitutional or undelegated acts as they happen. And Daniel Webster, I think he was probably not a favorite son of many people here, but even he was on our side. They just don't want us to know. Well, sometimes he was. He was opposing the use of basically, I guess it would have been guard troops, but it wasn't really guard troops at the time, of state militia troops in the War of 1812, saying that according to the Constitution they should only be used for defensive purposes, which is absolutely correct. So maybe he got one thing right. But he said, the operation of measures thus unconstitutional and illegal ought to be prevented by a resort to other measures which are constitutional and legal. It is the solemn duty of the state governments to protect their own authority and to interpose between their citizens and arbitrary power. These are among the objects for which the state governments exist. So what does all this Old English mean? When the federal government gives you laws, they're not really laws. When it does stuff, gives you acts, regulations, mandates, whatever it may be, that are not authorized to them in the Constitution, you are not bound to obey them. So a lot of people tell me, wow, that sounds pretty cool. You know, we don't have to obey them. What is this nullification thing? What is it really? And the short answer of it is nullification is any act or set of acts or actions by you as people or by your state government, which is what we'll focus on more here today, that has as its end result a particular federal law being rendered null, void, unenforceable within your state. As you probably heard, I'm here all the way from California. And where I live, they smoke weed. Crazy Californians.
You can smoke weed here too.
I think he is. California smoking weed is an act of nullification. And it's high time, no pun intended, that people learn about this. Here's how it went down. Back in 1996, California voters passed what was known as Prop 215, authorizing people to use a plant for certain limited purposes. You know what the answer was? 3 presidents came to my state and said, supremacy clause, supremacy clause, supremacy clause. The federal government says you're not allowed to do that, so we don't care what you Californians have to say. You're not allowed to do it, and we're going to punish you if you do. We will send in people to raid you. We will arrest you. They threatened us over and over. Well, we did it anyway. Guess what? It ended up going to the Supreme Court. A number of years later, in 2005, there was a very famous case called Gonzalez versus Raich. And in that ruling, they in essence said that all state marijuana laws were illegal. At the time that ruling came down, there were 10 states that had such laws. Does anyone here know how many were repealed? Not a one. Zero. Today there are now 15, most recently Arizona, which is no liberal hotbed, I'm sure, now have active state marijuana programs. And what's the lesson? It doesn't matter if Congress has laws on the books telling you you have to do something or you can't do something, or you have to buy something or you can't buy something. It doesn't matter if the black-robed deities that call themselves the Supreme Court, I call them the American mullah. I don't care. The bottom line is, even if they tell us we have to do something, or we don't have to do something, or we have to buy something, or we can't buy something, or we can't grow something, or we can't eat something or sell something, they can have their opinion. But when enough of us stand up and say no, we don't care what your opinion is, when enough states back us up and say no, we don't care what your opinion is, there's not much that they can do to force their acts or their mandates down our throats. Another example. In 2005, the Bush administration gave us the lovely Real ID Act. Is anyone here aware of that? Not a real nice bill, like most of the other ones that come from Washington, no matter what president is in power. Well, a lot of people didn't like that, and actually crossed political boundaries. People on the left and on the right realized that there were either privacy violations or, well, we don't want a national ID card, or an unfunded mandate on the states, another one. So a number of states, including right here in New Hampshire, said, hell no. 2007, your lovely Governor Lynch. He signed, well, this is where he's a hypocrite. So he signed House Bill 685, refusing compliance with the Real ID Act. It says, the general court finds that public policy established in this bill, blah, 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 violates the New Hampshire Constitution as well as Amendments 4 through 10 of the U.S. Constitution. Lynch is a tender. He just doesn't know it yet. We got to convince him. Therefore, the state of New Hampshire shall not participate in any driver's license program pursuant to the Real ID Act or in any national ID card system that may follow. Lynch is a nullifier, and don't let him get away with telling you he is not. He likes it when the ACLU pushes nullification, which is what they did. They didn't use the word, but they did. They said refuse to comply. So when we hear things like, we have a lot of our legislation from the 10th Amendment Center introduced around the country. For example, in Montana, a ton of it going on in Montana, and they absolutely hate us there. Governor Schweitzer, who years ago did the same thing that Lynch did, he signed a bill that actually said we will nullify the Real ID Act in Montana. He signed a medical marijuana bill. He signed a Firearms Freedom Act there that said any gun made in the state of Montana, sold in the state of Montana, are outside the reach of the federal government under what they call the Interstate Commerce Clause. Well, in 2008, when they were really pushing this Real ID thing, so a lot of states were resisting it, the DHS was pissed. They're like, oh, well, we better start threatening these low-life serfs. Get them in a line. So they said, well, you're not going to be able to fly if you don't do this. Get your states on board, or you will not get on a plane. You won't go into a federal building. Well, I never really want to, so that would be a blessing. So they were really pushing it aggressively. You know what Schweitzer said in Montana on an NPR interview, national NPR? He said, well, our policy, we feel it's just best to tell them to go to heaven. I'm like, awesome, this guy's pretty good. He said this on national radio, national government radio. The irony is beautiful. So now, today, we've got our Healthcare Nullification Act. This is a bill that, you know, a number of states have passed bills over the last year or so that ban a healthcare mandate. Well, at the 10th Amendment Center, we don't like anything kind of milquetoasty. So we basically drafted this legislation that said, the entire Patient Protection Affordable Care Act, every single word of it, is unconstitutional, top to bottom. And in that bill it says this bill is, okay, oh, go for it, yeah. So it says in the legislation, I'm just paraphrasing, that this law is null, void, of no effect, and it also says that any federal agent attempting to violate this state law by enforcing these national health care mandates, for example, or any of the national health care, would be guilty of a felony and subject to potential prison.
Right.
So this bill is being considered in Montana and 10 other states, Texas, for example. And Schweitzer, who signed the nullification bill of Real ID a couple years ago, he says, anyone who pushes this nullification nonsense is un-American. The reality is we've got a bunch of hypocrites, and they come from both sides of the political spectrum. Because when we were opposing the Real ID Act, and we were opposing the Patriot Act, and we were opposing just about everything else that the Bush administration did, many people on the right said, you're un-American. And now today, the left is in power, and we're un-American for opposing national health care mandates and gun laws, and, well, the same stuff we opposed back then. So it's important for us to recognize and kind of call out these liars for what they are, and point out that what they did previously on Real ID and marijuana from the left has actually been very successful. We've got something to learn from here. Again, when enough people in enough states say no to Washington, they can't enforce their laws on us. And we need to apply that to just about everything else, whether it's our gun rights, our health rights. I don't know, maybe we can stop them from spying on us, or maybe like there's this nice bill here in New Hampshire that says there can't be any body scanners in your airports. This would be a great idea. So what we really have is some partisan constitutionalists, Lynch, Schweitzer, I don't know, all of them really. But the bottom line is, when you allow a politician to bend the rules, they always do, even ostensibly for good reasons, you allow them to do it year in and year out. So conservatives often would say, well, you know, we don't want the federal government to do much, but we don't like weed. We think it's dangerous. So we'll allow the court to use an expanded version of the Commerce Clause to say that marijuana can be illegal. But if you were to ask Nancy Pelosi or Harry Reid today, where do you get the authority to force people to buy health insurance? If they even dignify you with a response without laughter, they will tell you the Commerce Clause. And they get that from the Gonzalez versus Raich ruling in 2005, which said that growing a plant in your backyard was illegal. And Clarence Thomas, who sometimes gets it right, he specifically said after that ruling, he said, if the federal government is somehow given the authority to regulate 6 cannabis plants grown in one's backyard for personal consumption in their home that is not even sold, the federal government has unlimited powers. It can control everything from basically, I mean, again, kind of paraphrasing, but from a bake sale to your guns to anything. And that's what it's done. And this is why we need to do what we stand for, which is the Constitution, every issue, every time, no exceptions, and no excuses. The beauty of this whole thing really kind of rests in this idea of decentralization. Some people call it federalism, some people call us tenthers, some people call us wackos. But this whole system of what's right for California may not be right for New Hampshire. What's right for New Hampshire may not be right for South Dakota. What's right for South Dakota may not be right for anybody. Sorry if I mentioned South Dakota. That's for you too. This is the only system in existence that I'm aware of. I'm sure someone will correct me later. You can come to the front and buy a book for me too while you do it. It's the only system that allows people in this country, we've got 300 million people that live here, a huge range of political, economic, religious viewpoints. It's the only way we can all live together in peace. Because we can all have our own viewpoints in our own area. We've got the Free Staters here, who are really kind of a personification of the message that we're putting out. Now, some people love them here, I hear. Some people hate them. But the concept that people kind of going together and being in the same place and trying to build a society that they want around them, whether it's South Carolina or New Hampshire or Los Angeles or whatever it may be, that's really the way things are supposed to work. And that prevents people from having to go to Washington, D.C. and get some thugs in suits to try to force their view over everyone in the entire country. And that's what we're talking about. So have the people of New Hampshire ever violated a federal law so much that it would be unenforceable? I don't know. But it's high time that you do. And in the end, whether medical marijuana passes in the New Hampshire State House or healthcare nullification passes, you, the people, will have spoken. Nullification is alive and well in New Hampshire. One last thing I wanted to leave you with is just this message that what we're talking about here, what those people outside probably don't realize, is that this is not about political parties or political ideologies or political anything. It's about limiting the federal government to those powers that we've given to it and nothing more, and keeping the most difficult and divisive issues close to home where they belong in our states. And that's it. And every time I do an interview with some media clown, I mean, just in the last couple of weeks, I've done interviews with USA Today, New York Times, Time Magazine, a bunch of local papers, the Concord Monitor, which refused to publish most of my quotes. We'll see if they're here. Hopefully they do. I think they were surprised by my weed talk or something. I don't know. States' rights? What? It applies to everything, really. They always ask me the same question every single time. I know it's coming. And if you've heard me talk before, you've probably heard this as well. They always say, Michael, so what political party do you support? Every time. It could be Fox, it could be CNN, anybody. What political parties do you support? Well, I give them the standard talking point response. The 10th Amendment Center is a nonpartisan think tank based in Los Angeles that stands for a constitution. We don't support political parties. And they respond with the exact same reply. But, you know, you're the founder of the organization. What about you? What political party do you support personally? We want to get an idea where you're coming from. And I don't think they believe me, but it's true, and I say none. Bottom line is this. I'm not a liberal, or a conservative, or a Republican, or a Democrat, or a Green, or a Libertarian, or a Socialist, or an Anarchist. I'm not even an independent. All I am is me, and all I want is to live free. Thank you for joining me.